My fellow conspirator and conspirators, it is of course I, your boy, Matty Milligan, and this is episode number 29 of the Underground Marketing Conspiracy. Woo! Alright, today we are going to be talking about sticky ideas and the stickiness factor. Now, what inspired me to talk about this today is that I've been reading this book Made to Stick by the Heath brothers. And it's actually based off of an idea in Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, from the year 2000. And I've found this book just very interesting, and I talk a lot about the big idea. And hopefully my goal today is hopefully to get you to recognize a big idea, but also give you a couple of things to look for to realize that it's going to be a big idea and that it's actually a sticky idea, right? Something that resonates with your ideal customer, but at the same time, it needs to be something that they really need to remember, right? It's like you might have heard this term of like sticky apps. I know right now everyone's talking about TikTok, and it's definitely the sticky app right now. And it's funny because it's actually been around for a few years. I remember back in the day when I first heard about it in 2016, it was called Musical.ly. And it's just taken off since then, right? And you can clearly see it's an app that a lot of people are using right now from what I've seen just based on the numbers. But I'll give you a couple of ideas first of all. So, one of the main things in this book is that they give 6 principles of sticky ideas to look for. So let's go through each of those. So first of all, number 1 is simplicity. So your ideas need to be very straightforward. For me as a copywriter, this is one of my biggest challenges because I'll think it's a great idea, but one of the things that I usually do is I'll come up with a very long headline, and then from there it's really about whittling it down to the best components, taking out words that aren't useful, that aren't really making that message hit home. I would just want to make it as simple and as easy to digest as possible in as few words as possible. Some of the best marketing campaigns that I have personally ever seen have very few words. I've talked about the Skittles campaign that they still use today, Taste the Rainbow. It's 3 words, and that will be making Skittles money. I think they're owned by Mars. That'll be making Skittles money, and it'll make them profitable for a long time. And they can use that same campaign over and over and over again. So that's principle number 1, keeping your ideas very simple. One thing they talk about in this book that I found very interesting was that certain movies, they'll pitch them based on other ones. For example, when someone was pitching Alien, they pitched it as Jaws on a spaceship, and they pitched Speed as Die Hard on a bus. And that's something where when you're pitching it, when you're doing that elevator pitch to someone, it's a very simple idea, especially these movie executives. I'm sure they all know that Die Hard was a huge success, and at the same time, I'm sure they recognize that Jaws was a huge success. So this is something where, again, you want to really just whittle down your ideas into as few words as possible so you can pitch it in maybe 1 or 2 sentences. Obviously, if it's a title of a book, that's something where no more than probably 5 words is the main thing, and then have your subtitle, the how-to, or whatever that secondary subtitle is for the book that explains the main big idea. I think that's really what you want to ideally do. But again, as few words as possible, really just to explain your idea. All right, number 2 is unexpectedness. So an idea that's unexpected, that you haven't seen before, that's very intellectually appealing, that you really weren't expecting, and that's surprising, that's something where you need to really understand where people's expectations are, understand what their day-to-day life is, and then get something that interrupts them. They call this in NLP pattern interrupts, where you're basically just, people are used to going through a specific process, and you basically throw a monkey wrench in it, being like, hey, you know what? Like, do this instead. This is one thing I do with a lot of the funnels I build for people, where when someone opts in, they're usually expecting a thank you page, but my thank you pages are going to have some craziness on that page, something they're not expecting. And I think One of the coolest things I saw recently was Sam Ovens, who I deeply respect, who is from consulting.com. His business has absolutely exploded the last 4 or 5 years. One of the things I saw him do recently is he went against chatbots and funnels and a lot of the other things in the marketing conspiracy. I think he went against cryptocurrency as well. He took a stand, which is a very smart thing to do, to be polarizing. So he took a stand against funnels. And recently he's had this campaign where he's like, oh, the holy grail of the whole marketing community is the funnel. But he's like, you don't know anything about the flywheel. And he goes into the flywheel. And I've read another book called, I think it's in Good to Great by Jim Collins, who's very well-read, well-versed business author. He's written Good to Great. I think it's, what's the other one? Good to Great, and then there's Great by Choice, and then Built to Last. I believe those are three of his main books. Awesome books you should totally read, and I do recommend listening to those and reading them for that fact as well. But in that book, he talks about the flywheel, was just something where it's like, it takes a lot of momentum to kind of get that flywheel going. You have to put a lot of energy into anything at first. And eventually you hit that point where the flywheel is just going to start keep going without its own momentum, right? You don't have to keep exerting effort into it. It takes a lot of work, and I believe they call this in science, I think it's in physics, catalytic energy, where the most amount of energy the most amount of energy exerted is always the initial energy. So that's something, again, is where Sam Ovens, him going against there, people aren't expecting you to go against funnels. It's like, oh, it's the holy grail. But when he makes a stand, it's something that you don't expect. What this dude does too is on his landing page, he makes you watch a video. And there's no call to action from the video. It's crazy. It sends you to like a blank, no action landing page. Because he's like, I want you to watch this whole video. I want you to land on that page. And I want you to watch and consume the whole video. And there is a button that appears at some point in the video, which I do myself. But what he does, though, is he has like these little icons where it's like Rotten Tomatoes, like 99% fresh, and then what's the popcorn one? I forget what. There's another one where it's the popcorn one, and I saw that on the landing page. I'm like, man, like this is some smart stuff, and I'm sure it's not just him. I'm sure his whole team that he's accumulated over the years of copywriters and designers and just big idea people. So for me, I'm like, wow, like this is a super sticky idea. And I've seen a couple of his campaigns, like that whole funnel and chatbot one that he has where he went against all the stupid things. I've seen people where they're like, I unfollowed Sam Ovens. I didn't like that he did that. So, and this is, again, really quickly, this is the difference between Facebook ads and search engine advertising, right? So when I go to Google and I type in buy XYZ, I'm actively looking for something. I know I have a problem. I know I need to find that product. I'm actively buying for that, right? I have buyer intent. But with Facebook ads, it's different. You need to have something unexpected that interrupts someone. I've done this with my own ads when I've had some quirky images of me doing some like weird poses, and it's more like psychedelic stuff. And again, that's really just to just get the person to stop, and I'm selling the click in that image. So again, it needs to be something that people aren't expecting to see. So you're interrupting them as to the regular pattern. And again, it needs to be something very unexpected that they really just, they expect they're gonna go to, I don't know, they expect they're gonna turn on the TV and, I don't know, watch like the basketball game, and then suddenly you interrupt them with an unexpected message, right? So that's the next one. Principle number 3 is concreteness. So this is, again, where you need to use very concrete images, and you really need to be clear. You need to explain your ideas in terms of human actions, in terms of sensory information. Using proverbs is very important, using truths, but it needs to be, again, like in concrete, simple language. This one is kind of similar, I guess, to number 1, but I think this is really the only way to get it and make sure that your idea will mean the same thing to every single person, right? Because you can say something to one person, but it might have a different meaning to someone else, right? It's like, I always get this all the time, because I'm a copywriter, and people think that I do like intellectual property and patenting, and I'm like, no, that's like copywriting, like that's COPYRIGHT. What I do is WRIT and the ing. Like that, I do copywriting. I write words that persuade people to take specific actions. And basically, it's a lot of business writing that I do. That other stuff is all legal stuff, right? So again, having your ideas where it needs to appeal to different ones, because there's double meanings for tons of words. There's double meanings for all sorts of acronyms, right? This is why I read Elon Musk's biography a few years ago. And in that book, one of the things he likes to do is he's like, oh, when people come on, and he sent an email to his entire company being like, no more acronyms. It's just easy. It just makes the onboarding process a lot easier. So no acronyms whatsoever. And it's funny because right before I left Shopify, they did the same thing, right? They sent an email being like, less acronyms, like more, explaining each thing. Because you can go in and people start using acronyms, and it's like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. I get this all the time when I go to my dentist and they start talking of these terms, and then they ask me something and I'm like, what? Like I don't understand. And then again, they dumb it down for me, they make it a lot easier, and I'm like, okay, now you have a concrete idea. Now I understand what you're saying. So keep in mind, your idea needs to, appeal to a lot more people in some cases. So this is why really on making sure that your message is crystal clear, using only the specific words that you want to, making sure that the person has a concrete image of exactly what you want inside of their head. All right, principle number 4, credibility. This one's very straightforward because you can, as I've mentioned before, you can say and make the most outrageous claims, but you need to tie this down with proof, right? With testimonials, with authority, basically little things like that. That having credibility really just makes your ideas, again, when you have other people speaking highly of you, like that's really one thing that's going to make it carry itself. And in some cases, again, you can basically just have those own credentials and assets you might already have in your business about people speaking highly of you. But this is really, again, going to help people like buy into your philosophy of your ideas versus someone else's, right? Because one thing I like to do, I don't like to have, like, as I've mentioned, one testimonial. I like to have multiple ones. Like, I'll make a point. This is a big thing, by the way, in, I think it's Expert Secrets, but there's also Peng Joon's platform closing. Peng Joon, he does the whole perfect webinar formula with a little twist. And one of his twists is, he's like, yeah, I have my 3 secrets, but I'll say and go through the one secret, and then at the end of it, I'll go through and have that story about someone that got results using that specific idea that I had. And he does that in each occasion. It's like, just like my guy John, blah, 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 blah. And again, it all has context, so everything fits into what he's talking about. So when people see that, it's like, okay, yeah, oh, there's someone else that got that. Because it's like, oh, it's not just Peng Joon that had that. It's other people that had that. Oh, what's he talking about now? Oh, it's some other guy. Oh, so there's multiple things. And again, the more and more proof you have, it just makes selling a lot easier. Because again, people are trust online is so finite. So when you can put that proof out there in your marketing, it's going to make people believe you a lot. Authority is also another huge thing. If you can get a celebrity endorsement for your product, that's going to make it. Like, at this point, my podcast is pretty small. If I interview someone and they want to become an authority, they might get some results from that. But if like Larry King comes on and interviews you, it's like everyone's going to be like, all right, like everyone knows Larry King. Like he's probably one of the most famous interviewers in the entire world. So, and I've actually downloaded his book that talks about how to interview people because I have a lot of guests coming up on my podcast, which I'm super excited about because I just did a massive email campaign and I got lots of responses. I think every single person that I emailed that last week actually replied to the emails. So yeah, my open rates are going to be pretty high moving up. And I'll go into that another day about guests, but credibility, super important. Again, that comes from proof. I think authority is a really big one as well. All right, number 5 principle for the stickiness factor is emotions. So you want to tap into people's emotions to convey your point, right? People like to think things to a certain extent, but they really like to feel things, right? They don't like these abstract kind of logical ideas. As I've said so many times, people buy based on emotion and then rationalized with logic. So when you get people into an emotional state of mind, it makes it a lot easier to tell yours. I was watching Toy Story 4 the other night with my boy, 3D, and man, like the story in that is extremely emotional. Like every point, like at the end, you're always like, oh my god! Like every Toy Story, I always watch it, And I'm always like, all right, like this time I'm not going to be like sad at the end because it's going to touch me, right? Because at the end of Toy Story, I think 3, they have the scene where they're like all holding hands and like going into this big fire cauldron. It's like, is this the end? And then they get miraculously pulled out by the claw, which I thought was like one of my favorite scenes ever. And again, it has those little alien dudes who are like, claw, and they're pulling them out with this massive claw. That was amazing. But Toy Story 4 at the same time, I'm like, all right, like at this time, I'm not going to get emotional at the end. And then sure enough, right at the end is like the scene where one of them is like departing. And I'm like, oh man, this is so beautiful. Like, oh, the writing is amazing. Like John Lasseter, like what a genius. Pixar, they're amazing. So you need people to start feeling things for your stuff. Like, and again, you want them to feel probably good things, unless, of course, you're marketing horror movies, right? If you're marketing horror movies, you want people to be scared, right? You want them to be like, feel that thing. And people are wired to feel, as I mentioned before, people are wired to feel things. Like, we're very emotional beings, because there's so many different chemicals happening inside of our brains and in our bodies. So when your stuff really hits people on that emotional level, I think that's what it is, right? So I think like, and again, if you aren't tapping into people's emotions, it's probably because, or if you aren't getting people emotional, it's probably because you yourself aren't being vulnerable and you're not putting yourself in a state of mind and you're not feeling that thing. This is a big thing again in NLP where it's like, go first, right? Feel that emotion first. If I want you to feel happy, I myself have to feel happy first, right? And then I basically transfer that emotion onto you. And this is another big principle in selling, right? It's like, selling is basically, I think it was Zig Ziglar, or it might have been Brian Tracy, but I think one of them said that sales is nothing more than a transference of emotion from one person to another. This is why selling stuff you're not passionate about and you can't get emotional about is very, very, very hard to do. For me, for example, I always use the idea of horseback riding. I think horses are cool, but like, I don't get it. I don't know why people are so obsessed with them. It would be very, very, very difficult for me to sell anything with regards to equestrian, anything with regards to the rodeo, anything. And I'm sure people love it. There's a show in Canada called Heartland. People like die for this show. My brother's girlfriend like loves horses. I used to see a woman who was like obsessed with them. She wanted to buy like 5 or 6 different horses and basically just a ranch eventually. And she might even have that. I need to talk to her again because that would be a cool example. But I think, again, getting people emotional, if you yourself can't get in that emotional state, if you're not passionate about what you're selling, like you need to find something different to sell. And that's going to make selling whatever it is just so much easier. All right. Principle number 6, stories. You know what's funny? All these points are stuff that I've talked about in the past. But again, number 6. So you need to tell stories to get people to actually act on your ideas, right? You need to tell parables, you need to have allegories for stuff. And again, research shows that you're basically just mentally rehearsing in a situation, and this basically just makes it so that people can get a crystal clear image of what you're talking about in their mind. But again, when you just hit them with stats and facts, it's like, that's not necessarily going to sell, right? The old adage, facts tell, stories sell, still works, right? This is why this course I was talking about, story selling, and the Subscriber Reviver Challenge by Ada Golden is awesome because you learn a lot about telling your own stories in that case on a very emotional level, and then add those other elements I talked before. But stories are super important. When you look at all the old classic myths and books, there's usually an awesome story behind all of those, right? And I think one of the things as well that makes stories really important is like making sure that it's like a really like emotional thing, that you have a mixture of emotions throughout the process, and it's not predictable as well. That's what really makes, from what I've seen, like really good stories. But, and this is again, like, I think there's a book that I'm about to get by Michael Haig. He's this big consultant and writer in Hollywood where they call him in when they want to make sure that the story is going to follow the specific guidelines he's basically laid out. I think his book is called Storytelling Made Simple. I know I'm about to order it on Amazon, but then I'll go more into that into the future. But even when you look at a lot of mythology, it's always based around a specific story, right? I remember one of my favorite courses was classical civilizations when I was back in high school. And in there, when they would just tell me facts about ancient Greece and ancient Rome, I'd always be like, yeah. But then they're like, oh, we're gonna go into mythology, and I loved the myth of Hercules growing up. I thought that was pretty cool. But in there, they made it go like super into depth, like all the different challenges that this guy had, all the stuff he had to overcome. And one of the cool things about that I like about, and I talked about this, I think, about being vulnerable, was like with a character like Hercules, he had his weaknesses, right? So being vulnerable is a really good way to increase the believability and credibility of your stories and make them just a lot more potent on an emotional level. It's like with Superman. Superman originally was just this dude. He was like, bah, and he would go out and beat everyone up, and no one had any chance, right? And people were like, ah, this is boring. Like, it's like this dude goes out and he wins, and then he wins again, and he wins again, and he wins every time. Then they introduced the idea of kryptonite, and then their sales just skyrocketed for DC because it's like, oh, he has this weakness, right? He has this thing, right? That's why Achilles is so cool, because Achilles was like this awesome hero, but he had his weakness in his heel, right? So when I think it was an arrow or he got sliced in the heel, like that's what did him in, right? And again, it shows that human side in the story. But again, looking at all these myths, like I love Norse mythology. Like I think Norse mythology is super awesome. I love like all the conspiracy theory, obviously, like 'cause this is the underground marketing conspiracy after all. I do like a lot of conspiracy theory ones, especially like, oh man, they talk about this in Made to Stick. It's like when a young celebrity dies, it becomes a conspiracy, right? It's like Marilyn Monroe dies. It's like, oh, conspiracy, like who killed her? Oh my God, like JFK died. Oh my God, he died young. James Dean, it must be a conspiracy. And whenever someone dies, like a famous person dies, like Elvis, Michael Jackson, when any of these people pass on, I think those are really good stories as well, right? And people, Kurt Cobain one I think is like a really great conspiracy theory story when you go back and look into ones like that. But again, stories are just a lot more useful. And if you want more about that, I mean, I've recommended expert secrets like every 2 or 3 episodes of this podcast. So I recommend you check out Russell Brunson's Expert Secrets because he goes deep into why you need to tell stories and really how to tell stories very effectively. And I think what he talks about again goes into each of those principles. And again, this is really just something where you're making your ideas stick, you're making them very memorable. And again, it's very simple. I mean, I'd really just have it. It's like, okay, get their attention, pattern interrupt them, get their attention, and then again, introduce them to the idea in a very simple way, back it up with some proof and credibility, and make sure, again, that it appeals to a lot of people, make sure it's something they don't expect, make sure that there's a story, but the story needs to, again, tap into people's different emotions, right? It can't just be one specific emotion. Like, you need to get them to feel, like, happy and sad and angry, and then like have retribution and have vindication and revenge at the end. This is why Shakespeare's stuff was so potent, by the way. So that's really my 2 cents on increasing your stickiness factor, really just making your ideas stick. And should hopefully help you as well come up with your really big ideas, your concrete ideas, which from what I've talked about in the past is really the crux and the core of your entire marketing campaigns. Really hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you did, I want you to give this a thumbs up. Maybe even consider giving this a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, Deezer, iHeartRadio, wherever you are listening to this on, maybe even Google Play. Give it a 5-star review. Consider listening to other episodes. Consider subscribing as well. If you're on YouTube, I want you to hear that ding notification because that way you'll be instantly notified when I do drop a new hot video for you and for all the other conspirators and conspirators. All right. That is all for today. I am, of course, your boy, Matty Mills, aka Matty Milligan, and I will see you next time on another episode of the Underground Marketing Conspiracy. Woo!